This is SiriusXM Insight. You're listening to Tell Me Everything with John Fugelsang.
Anyone looking to purchase a book, to purchase a dog or adopt a dog or rescue a dog has a lot of questions they should be asking themselves. I'm sorry, Frank?
Go get your book from Book Mills.
No, I wouldn't buy my,
Okay.
no. And this book clearly didn't come. So into the fray comes Kim Caven. Her new book is called The Dog Merchants, Inside the Big Businesses, the Big Business of Breeders, Pet Stores, and Rescuers. And it's an insightful and really, oftentimes devastating examination of what people hardly ever think about, which is the business, the economy behind buying and selling pets. Kim Caven, welcome to SiriusXM Insight.
Thank you for having me, and I promise I don't work at a book mill. There's no here.
You just hear these horror stories about these poor books that come from a book mill, and the cover's so pretty, the kid wants it. You have no idea where that book came from. Thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on the accolades your book has been receiving. You really address all sides of a lot of very difficult conversations and debates that are happening in the canine world between behaviorists and trainers and vets and people who work with folks after they purchase a dog. You talk about the sort of things that you should understand and know before you get a dog, and often you cover a lot of areas that both sides of the rescue debate and breeder debate might not want to hear. What made you think this was the right time for this book?
Yeah, thank you. I'll tell you what gave me the original idea was people kept telling me they thought my dog was dead, which sounds crazy, but I had written a previous book in 2012 about a dog that I adopted, and he and I went out on the book tour, and people would be holding the book with his picture on the cover and looking at him and looking at the book, and they'd hand it back to me and say, I can't read these books. They're so sad. The dog always dies at the end. And I'd say, this is him. He's standing right here. And they couldn't get past it. Could not get past that these kinds of books always make people cry. So I spent a couple years just trying to figure out how do you talk about these issues in a way that people interested in purebreds and mutts will actually pick up the book and read it and be interested in it. And I found myself one day at sitting in the bleachers in Missouri at America's biggest legal dog auction, and I watched for about 8 hours as about 300 purebreds got auctioned off, not just purebreds, mostly purebreds, also some popular crossbreeds like Labradoodles and Puggles and things like that. But they got auctioned to the highest bidder, and there were breeders and rescuers in the room bidding on it. And I thought, this is it. This is the way you get in. You show people something they've never seen. You talk about how both sides maybe have more in common than you thought, and you talk about how at its core it's a business, and you follow the money. And people are willing to talk about cash because they don't think it's going to make them cry.
I barely knew anything about dog auctions before, and you cover that in this book, as well as something that I think most people really need to understand, the dramatic difference between small breeders and huge breeders.
Yeah, I think both the dog auction chapter and the chapter about a place called the Hunt Corporation are the two on the breeding side that really people's eyes kind of pop wide open. The Hunt Corporation, also in Missouri, is a place most people don't get inside, and I managed to get in for a day and interview their top officials and take a full tour of the place. This is a distribution company right near Walmart and Tyson Foods in that part of America, and depending on the year and how puppy sales are going, these guys are moving between 45,000 and 90,000 puppies off the commercial breeding farms.
Would you mind repeating that stat one more time in case any of our listeners missed it, please? I think it bears repeating.
It's a little startling. Depending on the year and how business and consumer demand for puppies is going, the Hunt Corporation acknowledges that they are moving between 45,000 and 90,000 puppies a year off the commercial breeding farms, which some people would call puppy mills, and into homes and pet stores all across the United States. So when you spend a day at the dog auction, go inside a facility like that, you really start to understand the business economics of the breeding side. And quite frankly, I saw a lot of things that looked very similar to what I've seen in the business economics of the shelter and rescue side. So it was very eye-opening to me, and apparently to a lot of readers too. Yeah,
let's break all of that down, Kim. I'm so glad you're on the show, because this book is not just about how to be a good dog owner. This is about how to be a proper consumer.
I call it being a conscious consumer. I'm at the grocery store like everybody else, trying not to use the plastic bags, trying to buy the the good refrigerator that doesn't burn up too much electricity. I think we should apply that same mentality to dogs.
It's just a little bit tough to check the ingredients on a dog, if you know what I mean.
It's true, but you can check the source, the merchant, as I call them. You absolutely can.
Well, you know, there is more and more a cry for responsible breeders to do things like breeding out diseases, breeding for personality. If dogs are going to be living with a family with kids, what's the good news in the dog breeding? I guess that's the easiest way to start. What's the good news about what's going on with the dog breeding industry? And we need to call it an industry.
I think the good news is that there's a lot of great breeders out there, and readers are going to meet them in this book as well. Whether you're talking about people who breed one litter every 3 years out of their home, or you're going to meet a commercial-scale puppy farmer who has about 50 dogs on his property who do not live in tiny little filthy pens. They live in giant open, what would be bigger than a lot of backyards in the state of New Jersey where I live. And they run and they play, and I met them, and they were happy, and they were well cared for. And you're going to meet all different kinds of breeders who really do a good job taking care of their dogs. And I think that is good news right now, because the media right now, the general mentality right now in America is that breeding on the whole is just bad. Rescue's good and breeding's bad.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's true. I think there's good and bad across the board. So you're going to see some good breeders in this book, too.
Well, that's another area you go into. It's not quite that black and white. And you talk about some of the problems with the rescue community, because some rescue sites are more reputable than others.
Yeah, when you look at it from a follow-the-money angle, it becomes very clear very fast. What we have done, we in the United States are the biggest market for pet dogs in the history of humanity, ever, in the history of the world. We want about 8 million pet dogs a year. They have to come from somewhere. Traditionally, they've always come from breeders. Our parents, our grandparents, they went to the pet store or went to a breeder and got a dog. In our lifetime, everybody's now going and adopting. Everybody's going to a shelter or a rescue group. And so what's happened is in the past 10, 20 years, maybe at most, rescue has taken over a huge chunk of the market. And whenever you move millions or billions of dollars from one side of a business market to another, you're going to get problems. You're going to get opportunists. You're going to get people who cut corners to make a quick buck. You're going to get all the kinds of things that we saw for years and didn't do anything about in breeding that we're now unfortunately starting to see popping up in rescue that requires us to be conscious consumers there as well.
Like what?
Well, for instance, I can tell you from my personal experience, I have 2 adopted mutts who are both gorgeous, wonderful dogs. I've also fostered 21 dogs in my home who came out of high-kill shelters and were transported up across state lines. Only 2/3 of those dogs actually arrived at my house as advertised, meaning they were actually healthy or friendly. Some of them required extensive veterinary care. One of them bit me 5 times. So when you have some rescuers who are trying to save every last dog as quickly as they can, sometimes you get people moving sick or temperamentally unsound dogs into homes. And the story that I just told you is not even remotely unusual. In states like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, up in the Northeast where it's been going on with these rescue transports for a lot of years now, they've had to pass emergency orders and enact new rules that say dogs have to be quarantined on arrival. In Rhode Island, they were getting so many complaints about dogs being imported by rescue groups with parvo, which is a really tough disease that can kill a dog, and it's highly transmittable. They got so many reports. They went from 3, I think he said 3 reports a year to 3 a week, and every time he traced them back, they came to a rescue group. So they had to put in all kinds of new rules for how the rescues could operate. Again, these people aren't, I don't think intentionally in most cases, doing things irresponsibly, but when a sick dog is ending up in a home, we have to pay just as much attention to that when it's being done by a rescuer as we do when it's being done by a breeder.
Neil, you want to jump in?
Yeah, hey, Kim, it's
By
Neil.
the way, I want everyone to know Neil is sitting here with his phone open to a picture of his dog. Only I can see it. No one else can see it. We're on the damn radio, but Neil is so excited
And I was pointing
that you're
to-
here, Kim, that he's actually got his phone open to a picture of his
What
mutt.
kind of dog is it, Neil?
He's a mutt. He's German Shepherd and Lab. He's about 80 pounds. He's a big moose.
He's on Tinder.
So I wanted to jump in because I went to a very reputable shelter on Long Island, and I was looking to get an adult dog because I didn't want to go through the whole puppy phase and ripping up my couch and shoes. And every time I was alone with the dog, an adult dog, the people at the shelter were like, well, he doesn't like kids, or this one barks too much, this one's been sick. And I kept running into a pattern of all the adult dogs that were up for adoption had a problem with either kids or being sick or just being aggressive. So I ended up getting a puppy, and he did eat my couch.
As they usually do. Yeah.
A nice leather couch he ate.
It's funny that you mention that because in the second half of the book, which is about rescue, I talk about some new trends in rescue, and one of them is something called senior dog adoption.
Thank you. Yes.
That's what I want. I wanted to get a dog that nobody else would want because he was older.
That's
and
already trained.
But they all had issues.
Oh.
Well, not necessarily. Well, one of the rescuers I talked to about that in the book, she was from out in California. She started the group because, like you, she had been going into the shelters and volunteering out there for a lot of years and had seen what happens, where the puppies and the 2-year-olds always get adopted faster, and the older dogs just languish in there, and they look even worse than they are, and they start to freak out because they've lived in a home all their lives, and they don't understand what's happening, and, they get worse faster, so to speak. And she ended up one day with a mutual acquaintance who was in hospice care. And the woman was afraid to die because she didn't know what was going to happen to her senior dog. It was a perfectly awesome dog, already trained, just what you would have been looking for in the shelter. And what this woman did was she started a rescue group called Peace of Mind Rescue, which she thought would help people going into hospice. And she ended up figuring out that if you just get the senior dogs out of that environment and market them on a website or in an adoption event where only senior dogs are available and people know to go there if they want those kinds of dogs, almost all of them get adopted every time. It's a comparison thing in our heads where you're looking at the senior dog next to the 5-year-old dog or next to the puppy, and the dog just looks worse than they are. That's what they figured out in California.
Wouldn't one of the hindrances to adopting a senior dog is don't people, when they get a pet, kind of are thinking about like a long-term kind of part of their lives?
They are, and what these people classify as senior can vary widely. With a
4-year-old
small dog, a 7-year-old dog, a 15-pound 7-year-old dog could have another 10 years left in the dog, maybe even more.
Right.
A 5 or 6-year-old larger breed dog like yours is at 80 pounds. I think they would consider a 5 or 6-year-old a senior at that point, and even that dog might have another 5 or 7 years left to go. And again, we're talking about people who understand the trade-offs where, you're losing a few years of companionship, but you're gaining the couch not being chewed up and not having all the other things that come along with having a puppy, which not all of us want. I'm in my 40s now. I get it. Puppies aren't for everybody.
Our guest is Kim Caven. She's the author of The Dog Merchants, highly recommended. And I have to ask you, Kim, how much of a villain at this point, albeit inadvertently, are dog shows becoming? I mean, when you look at how the dog shows keep creating these new fashion fads and then make it difficult for other breeds, I'm thinking, the German Shepherd craze after Rin Tin Tin, the Collie craze after Lassie, Dalmatians after 101 Dalmatians, and now the Westminster dog shows that seem to be actually driving the industry. Is there inherently some bit of villainy attached to this, or is it just the demons of the trendy marketplace?
I'll tell you, I think it depends on whom you ask. If you ask the breeders participating in those shows, they'll tell you I'm the villain for saying that, yes, the shows have become part of the big picture problem and that the shows are actually the villain. I can tell you where I get my opinion from. What I say in the book is that we need to get the shows off television.
Really?
Westminster in particular has been on the air in America since 3 years before I Love Lucy. So if you can imagine the impact of television at that time in our society and compare it with the impact of media today, back then you didn't put a dog on TV and somebody was sitting there with a smartphone and they could order up a puppy inside of 30 seconds.
Exactly. What happened with Dalmatians after the live-action remakes of the Disney animated film was just a tragedy.
It was terrifying. And one of the people you meet in the Dog Merchant's book is a rescuer who had to deal with that down in Florida. She would go with her full-grown Dalmatian and stand outside the movie theaters and wait for the inevitable rush of kids all jacked up on sugar and candy and soda. They'd come running out and scream, "Dalmatian, Dalmatian," and she would hand the parents a stuffed animal and say, "Please buy this for Christmas instead. I beg you. Please don't go buy the puppy. Look how big my dog is. My dog is bigger than your kid. My dog will still be alive when your kid is in college." It's a very big ordeal to go and get a dog. But obviously this poor woman was up against a Disney marketing machine.
Yeah,
I mean, and
but how many poor Dalmatians got abandoned on the side of the road because of it?
In some of the stats from the book, in Boulder, Colorado, the Humane Society there saw a 310% spike in Dalmatian drop-offs. In Tampa Bay, it was 762%. And it happened all over the world. There's stats from England in the book. It was atrocious. But Westminster in particular, the reason I say get them off the TV is not just the marketing impact, but how the resulting consumer demand gets filled. What I say in the book is, I don't have a problem with dog shows, like people getting together as breeders to do their thing. You know, go do it in a field, go do it wherever you want to do it. But when you put it on television, it's no longer about the people in the show ring. And the reason that we know this is not just spikes like we saw with various breeds in the dog shows and in other media, but because one of the documents that I unearthed in writing this book was a marketing missive written by the guy who at the time was the American Kennel Club's director of marketing. And it was a document called Creating Demand for Purebred Dogs. And he writes about how these shows are part of an events strategy that helps create demand for purebred dogs no matter where the consumer tries to buy them. And the place that document was published was in a magazine put out by the owner of America's biggest legal dog auction, where all the commercial breeding farmers are sitting in the bleachers doing their business.
Okay, well, I want to get to a couple of our
Were
callers.
the dogs doing their business
How
too?
dare you? How dare you, sir? I want to get to a couple of our callers, Kim, but before I do, I want to build on something you just said, because what I really admire about the book, besides how you view this as a business, is also how you really take pains to neither condemn nor approve. You try very hard to be objective in the book, but in going through your book, it really, really made me feel that purebreds are an unnatural man-made invention, and that certified purebreds probably don't make better pets than other dogs.
I think that it's accurate to say that they are, for the most part, a man-made invention. If you go back to the 1800s, before the dog shows, there were maybe 40 recognized dog breeds. Nowadays, if you look worldwide, you can add a zero to that. And we add new ones every year. Last year, I think they added 7 into the Westminster show alone. It's like new models being rolled out every year, just like you'd see at an auto show or whatever. So I don't think that saying they're a man-made invention that anybody would argue with that. That's just science and history.
Yeah.
Whether or not they make better pets, purebred owners and mutt can argue all day, but the science on the subject tells us, dogs are dogs. If you get the right dog, they're great dogs. They're all different.
GMDs. Let's go to the phones. Mary's been on hold the longest, calling from Oklahoma. Welcome, Mary. You're on SiriusXM Insight with Kim Caven, author of The Dog Merchants.
Hey, first, I want to say I really love the way Frank posts all pictures of his cats on his Facebook page.
Isn't that nice?
I just think that's so sweet. But I want to say I'm really looking forward to reading your book, because I appreciate what I think is a really balanced approach to it. And I'm just going to say I'm not sure I'm particularly balanced. I live in a state that has the second largest number of puppy mills and some of the worst oversight of puppy mills in the country. I've worked in animal welfare as the director of a nonprofit rescue, and also at the largest municipal open access shelter in Oklahoma. And at that shelter, we took in 26,000 animals a year. Mm. And so when we talk about good breeders or bad breeders, really, I have really kind of a problem with the concept of creating any animals that we already have such an overabundance of. Mm-hmm. And you really haven't had a bad day at work until you've participated in the euthanasia of 50 puppies in an afternoon on a routine basis, because there are so many animals out there in need of homes. The idea that we would even be creating more just insane to me. But particularly, I just want, and I'm trying to make it really fast because I know you have a lot to talk about, but is the American Kennel Club. I really have a problem with how they manage things. Breeders can breed the worst, most unhealthy, most temperamentally unsound dogs on the planet. But as long as there's a breed line, they can pay their $10 to the AKC and get those papers for those dogs. And to me, that's just a racket. It's a way for the AKC to make money. And I participated in emptying a dachshund puppy mill in Oklahoma that had some of the most vicious little dogs I've ever encountered. And they had terrible genetic disorders with seizure disorders and bad teeth and bad personalities. But the owners of this puppy mill, who were actually going to prison for other crimes unrelated to the dogs, were really proud of the fact that all of these dogs had papers. And I just think if the AKC is going to claim to be an advocate for good breeding, they need to be an advocate for good breeding and not support these terrible, unregulated breeders who really just take a boy dog and a girl dog and put them together and then sell whatever is the result.
Mary, thank you so much for the call. You crammed a lot of points into that, and I do appreciate it. Are these critiques of the AKC something you hear often, Kim?
Yeah, thank you also, Mary. I can speak to both points pretty quickly. What Mary said is accurate about the AKC's business model. Just a week or two ago, they were quoted in a very big syndicated animal column saying it's ultimately up to the breeders how they choose to breed their dogs. Mary's absolutely right about that, and if the dog is from the quote-unquote right lines, the dog will get the papers. About a third of the dogs that I saw at America's biggest legal dog auction either had or were eligible for AKC registration papers, if that tells you anything.
Wow.
And then to Mary's first point, though, which I think is really important to address, I have not been to Mary's particular shelter in Oklahoma, I don't think, but I often hear that perspective from rescuers that there is no such thing as a responsible breeder in a world where we are killing so many dogs, so many healthy, friendly, adoptable dogs, including puppies, in our shelters. And I can completely understand how people in Mary's position feel that way. When I reported my first dog book, Little Boy Blue, which is about my own dog, Blue was nearly killed in a gas chamber shelter in North Carolina in 2010. And I went to that shelter, and I stood next to that gas chamber in a room full of puppies that were about to be tossed in, and I could not do a thing about it. And I see their faces to this day in my nightmares. I get it. I understand how seeing that day in and day out can make you feel like, how on earth could anyone breed more dogs when this is what we're doing?
Exactly. I mean,
but when I look at the statistics...
That's how I feel about children, too, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation.
I can't write a book about that one. But when you look at the stats, the reality is that maybe at most 20 to 25% of the dogs going into our shelters are purebreds. That's what the statistics from even the most diehard animal rights activists tell us. So 75% of the problem is coming from somewhere else, generally from a lack of spay-neuter. Random people don't spay and neuter their dogs. They bring in cartons full of puppies and dump them off. People who fail to train their dogs, don't want to be bothered, can't figure out how to do it, dump the dogs off when they hit adolescence and they start acting like teenagers. There's lots of things that contribute to the situations in the shelters. A lack of funding by taxpayers is part of the problem in places like Oklahoma. So to blame breeders for what's happening in the shelters, I completely understand how somebody like Mary gets there intellectually.
But it's not just the breeders. We built this as a society.
It's not entirely fair.
Yeah.